Starting first with a repurposed slide, community still in the black. Last year it read community is the new black. And I'm really thrilled that all of that buzz, all those conversations that were started last year are carrying on this year. Not only conversations, but I think Deanna put out a list of dot points as to who's doing what. And even today, through Tom, I've learnt more about what's going on out there, which I think is enormously positive. As everybody launches into it, I think they're all going to put their own spin on it. And there is some points of difference and different approaches, and there's even some different language, and we've heard that today, in particular, social licence versus community trust. I make the point, it's a large bullseye. I think we're all pursuing the same thing. I would like to see it over time shift towards more of a common understanding, but for the moment, I don't think it matters too much at all. For the record, I prefer community trust. That's our focus. We feel that it frames the relevant relationship. The community is vulnerable. They want to know that you're doing the right thing, and ultimately, we want their trust and their acceptance in relation to the practices of our industry. One important point of distinction that I'll flag is consumer versus community mindsets and consumer versus community trust. Look, both are important. It's just important to know which one you're talking about at each time. And it's a little confusing and counterintuitive because often these two concepts reside in the same individual. Certainly for the egg industry, 95% of Australian households have eggs in the house. And you could say there's 95% overlap between a community and a consumer mindset. But people operate very, very differently in terms of the way in which they consume and make purchasing decisions and the way in which they view themselves as part of a community. Now that can lead to, as Tom was flagging, the way in which they frame sustainability or social issues and ultimately the way in which they vote. I would encourage everyone who takes an interest and is encouraged and gets involved in this space to ensure that they maintain that clear distinction. Otherwise, you'll come a cropper. Also flag an important aspect of the work that we've done and something that I'm interested in promoting more broadly, and that's the power of community research. Through our research, if you like, inquiry as to what other supply chains are doing, other businesses, we managed to identify that there were other industries that were relying on what is effectively cutting-edge social science to monitor, measure and determine the drivers of and understand community trust. And we've drawn that into our industry, as I'll show you. I really do think there is enormous value in that, and I'd encourage everyone to understand it as best they can. In terms of what we've done, by way of summary, for us it's been a three-phase process. And it's funny, Tom and I went to a breakfast together this morning, and he mentioned that his company was looking at making investments in the order of hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think that's one of the reasons that Tom's taken such steps to understand this issue and act on it. I feel we have a commonality there. The egg industry involves making significant long-term investments, and you really have to get it right and understand your operating environment as best you can at a particular time. Otherwise, you really are risking significant sunk costs. So we felt we had to act, and act even if our actions were imperfect. We needed to encourage and assist our industries to get our heads around this, and we've done that in three ways. We've got the Australian Egg Industry Sustainability Framework, which, as I'll flag in a minute, is underpinned by community research. We're proposing a cross-sector community trust in rural industries project between a group of RDCs, and we're also involved in a cross-supply chain sustainable agriculture initiative platform, which I see as an important piece of the puzzle, but I think the one to explore down the track. We're exploring it currently, but we haven't quite got there yet. Making sense of the whole supply chain is a further step for us. So what is the Australian Egg Industry Sustainability Framework? Diana mentioned there's a few out there at the moment, and we were very fortunate to be able to learn from them. So beef and dairy have really excellent sustainability frameworks. And we picked them up and we thought, this is fantastic. I wonder what we could do to try and do better. We felt we were playing catch up. And as part of that, we thought, well, we think we're going to put the community at the centre of these processes. And instead of choosing, if you like, the issues that the industry thought were the relevant issues for the community, we thought, well, why don't we just ask them? And with the benefit of the CSIRO and their expertise with respect to social science, we did just that. So it started with April last year. We announced the sustainability framework and we put out there some very bold promises. We said our industry wanted to be seen as being responsible with respect to important sustainability issues, animal welfare, environment, lives of people, economic viability. And we promised to do it on a fully transparent basis. I guess you'd say that was a bit of a gulp moment. I don't know that every other industry is doing it on that basis, but we thought that was the best way to cut through and to demonstrate our bona fides with the community whose attention we were competing for in a pretty noisy world. So the CSIRO did their work last year. They put it out to a survey. It was done on two bases, a 5,400 person representative sample of Australians and also an open call. The open call ended up being very well attended as well. I think there was over 8,000 people responded. In October, they set out their report, their research outputs and their findings, and we have spent a few months working with that and determining a response. We released that last Wednesday. So we've now completed the first annual cycle of our sustainability framework. It's a 3-year initial process, but if I get my way, it will be perpetual because this is not an issue, as we talked about with respect to licences, that you can walk away from. It's a perpetual challenge and it needs a perpetual response. So very briefly, what did we get? We got issues and drivers. There isn't time enough to take you through all the issues. Very broadly, the community identified both the contributions and the impacts of the egg industry. We were legitimately surprised at the capacity of the community to recognise our contributions. Perhaps we underestimated ourselves or perhaps we underestimated the community. If you run off what the media tends to focus on, they tend to focus on negatives or controversy, and that's great because that sells newspapers. But in the end, the egg industry, like many other agricultural industries, make an incredible contribution. Contribution as a staple food, contribution in terms of nutrition. And that was recognised. But of course, these important issues that we know and assume that the community is interested in, be it animal welfare and the environment, came through strongly. Not only is the community interested in those issues, they're interested in them as they relate to the egg industry. That may seem obvious, but the value of the process is that it takes any argument otherwise off the table. When you've got an issue prosecuted against you through the media and perhaps through activist groups, it's easy to take two polar opposite views. One is that that's what everybody thinks, and I've certainly heard that perspective, and the other is that, oh, that's just what this tiny group of people think, normal people don't care about it, etc., and be dismissive. By taking this data-driven scientific approach, we're able to get a lock on what people actually think. That bell curve of, I can't remember the term, whether it was normal people or most people, I think it was, that Diana put up on the slide. And that's insightful because now we don't have to talk about anything else. We don't have to speculate about what might be happening. We know what's actually happening. The other great deliverable was this lovely graph here, which is the drivers of trust with respect to the egg industry. You'll see that 3 key drivers were identified: the extent to which the egg industry is regulated, the extent to which it's responsive to public sentiment, and the fact that the benefits of the egg industry outweigh the cost. They were drivers of trust and then ultimately drivers of acceptance in our industry. That there is our recipe for success. We need to pursue those issues, both in terms of substance and also communication, to demonstrate that we are deserving of the trust of the community. And the greatest deliverable of all amongst it is the way in which it drives conversations amongst our stakeholders. I say here, it drives the right conversations. So instead of wild speculation about what might be going on, what we might like to be going on, we now know what is going on. And it makes any proposal referable to that recipe for success. You say, oh, that's interesting, you'd like to do that. How does that relate to what the community set out as important to them? Now, that's not going to drive absolutely every decision, but it's a really important reference point, particularly if you're about to lay down a piece of infrastructure, however many tens of millions of dollars it's intended to last for 30 years. If information tells you that the community's not going to support that, that should be a serious canary in your mind as to whether you're going to be able to enjoy that infrastructure across the period of its life. In that, it ought to inform business decisions and also manage or assist in managing reputational risks. It's all about getting onto those issues early. If you're waiting, thinking you're winning because no one's talking about an issue, an impact of your industry, and everything's great, and just waiting for some four corners to come along and blow the industry sky high and create an incredible point of focus, I don't see that as a very productive strategy. I think it's been proven time and time again as not so bright. It doesn't work. I see great value in this process, and across the year we've enjoyed the benefits that it's been able to provide to us, most notably a positive leadership narrative around a preparedness to be open with the community, to listen to the community and ultimately act on community values and share the community values. And it's notable that this expertise didn't come out of the egg industry, came out of the mining industry. It's been applied in a number of other industries. And my suggestion is that other agricultural supply chains can and should consider it for their industry, likely to require modification, no doubt. But the fundamental premise is there. This provides an opportunity to tune in, to understand community sentiment in relation to your industry. I think that ought to be attractive. So on that note, about 12 months ago, we started a conversation amongst RDCs about the common challenge of community trust. The community doesn't see the silos of agricultural supply chains. They care about animal welfare. They're just going to project that where they see it. So one industry affects the other, and I think we have a shared incentive to work together on these issues. And so that's what the conversation has been and how it's evolved. And you can see there's a group of RDCs there and also the NFF that have been part of that conversation. And we've worked it up towards a project which is likely to commence or go live in the next couple of months, which is exciting. The objectives of it are largely to take a role as RDCs. Obviously, we're not the businesses. We're just sort of here to help, get balls rolling, assist in driving the sustainability of our industries. And so building awareness and increasing the capacity of our industries and the whole sector to address these issues is a key deliverable of this project. It would also be lovely if we could determine or develop a common language and purpose in relation to these issues. I do invite the interest. I should note that the interest is not ubiquitous. There are still enormous sections of the agriculture sector that have never heard of this issue. Particularly, there's an enormous challenge with respect to the farmers themselves, the membership bases of our organisation and representative body organisations that need to be brought on board this process and share these learnings. And also common best practice approaches. I think we are moving away from, and it's agreed, we're moving away from some of the counterproductive strategy of the past. The egg industry is certainly guilty of that. We did things in terms of reacting to issues in a way that was counterproductive. I'm seeing less and less of that, which is good. I'm still seeing a little bit of it. And in fact, I think Tom made reference to the MAP and the sort of the right to farm movements out there at the moment, which I entirely sympathise with, entirely. But I don't see it as the productive way to win the trust of the community and get over the line in relation to these issues. There is a question of how this will actually be done. Very briefly, it'll have a sector-wide focus. We're not looking for the specific issues that you might hear about or might end up on Four Corners. So if you're in sort of the grains industry, we're not going for glyphosate, if you like. We're not doing caged eggs, we're not doing live eggs. We're looking at a much broader level, looking at the way in which the community views agriculture as a whole. In that sense, many people won't get everything they want out of this project, and that's is part of communicating it, I guess, to make sure people aren't disappointed. We can't solve all of your problems, but we can show you some useful tools. In that respect, I see the project as somewhat of a demonstration model to demonstrate this research in application and the way in which it can be useful to individual supply chains. Finally, all RDCs, all researchers face the challenge of doing something wildly productive and then the risk that it ends up in a draw. And we're trying to see that coming and build into the project a process for dissemination of the outputs, including through the NFF's involvement, working very closely with representative bodies to make sure the message gets out there. Obviously, that involve the research outputs, the development of content, the facilitation of mechanisms, whether it's workshops, etc., to share that content, and direct engagement with members or farmers by those representative bodies. We see it as part of the process that the research is followed by the extension, is followed by the research, is followed by the extension, and we hope through that to really get some traction on this issue and to add some value. That's all I was going to address today. I hope I was quick enough, and we've got time for some questions. Thank you.